Welcome to Ike Comics Draw Process. I'm Ike. I'm going to draw my comic book, First Sun and Sword. It's episode 2, page 37 today. And I drew that last week. This week I did page 38. It's on the drawing table right now. But I do that in a time lapse, trying to show you every step of that process from thumbnail to finished inks. And you'll see the finished page at the end. You can read it as a webcomic on my website, ikecomics.com, or on cleverkaiju.com, the art community that I'm a part of. And in this video, I'll talk about the techniques, the decisions I'm making in storytelling, and I'll process about my development as an artist, as I always do in this series. So here we go. On today's page, the video is a little longer than usual because you are going to see a little bit of the penciling of the thumbnail, the sketch section of this in real time, because I wanted you to see that sometimes I'm pausing and thinking and just what that looks like, how much time that is. And I'll try to walk you through what decisions I'm making and as I approached that. And again, this was in the thumbnail phase, which is what this is that you're seeing right now. This is loose sketches that are laying out the panels, laying out the page. I'm starting with 4 equal width panels as a collage, basically, showing different pieces of this moment. We have Sword's injured foot and the soldier that is getting ready to engage him in a one-on-one combat. And then we see Sword. So we see each of their faces, their expressions, how they appear. Then we see Sword gripping his sword. The idea here is that the soldier is looking at Sword's foot. He's noticing that Sword has an injured foot. Now, initially, I penciled the wrong foot. It needs to be his left foot, and I will correct that later in this video. In the process, I notice it and change it before I ink. But he's going to be looking at the injured foot that's bandaged, and that's going to be him gathering information about, you know, what this fight's going to be like. This is a smart soldier. He's going to take advantage of this weakness. But we see that Sword is still prepared, even though he looks kind of sick and feverish, you know, tense, squinting. I try to convey that in his look. On the last page, we saw Sword and Sun having a little communication. We saw some of the emotion that each is feeling. We saw the soldiers introducing them to the scene, that they're this threat, and then we're showing a large establishing shot that shows it allows the audience, the reader, to get their own assessment. It's the moment of assessment. So it's one thing to just have an abstract threat, but it brings it more into reality, into the body of the reader. And that's really what we're trying to do. We want the reader to experience emotion, which could be in their physical body. It could be in facial expressions and just an arousal level and tension that they're holding as things get more tense. We're trying to get them to experience that in their body. And a really good story, a well-told story, is going to do that well, and it's going to bring a nice resolution, right? It's going to raise that tension in the body, and it's going to relieve it. And I think it's useful to think of it that way. A lot of people have learned about storytelling in a lot more cognitive terms, like the idea of raising tension and then bringing it down to resolution. It's all in the abstract. It's just like create these different conflicts in the realm of ideas. You know, it's really bring it into the body. And I think this is especially useful for visual storytellers. So when I'm drawing their, Sword's face here, and you can see that he looks, tired and a little weak. That is conveying something to the reader when we see his hands gripping the sword. But also in this panel before on the last page, when the reader gets to see the scene and make an assessment of that threat, it's not just abstract threat. They can see what the setup looks like. And they're going, just as you would if you were actually there, you're getting an assessment of like, okay, what's going on here? What's my options? How can this be addressed? When we identify with the main character, then I want to give the reader the opportunity to do that. So we have these establishing shots like that. We're going to get another one here, just a side view. We went from the soldiers, the entire established scene that was shot from more of a bird's eye view, and it looks more like a circle. Everyone's standing around. Now I'm going to this side view because we are transitioning to a one-on-one fight, and I wanted to reestablish, let the reader get another assessment here on this one-on-one level. And so the way this is framed communicates that. I've got a soldier in the foreground, really large there. I mean, in perspective, he's that large, but I placed that soldier there so that he would block out the other soldiers, so I don't have to draw so many. And it also creates a nice foreground element, frames the picture. Now, so I knew, okay, I've shown the pieces again. I'm letting the reader get an assessment of the situation, engaging their mind in that sense on how might this be dealt with, what is the nature of this threat, how serious is it, so on. I'm trying to engage their body and their emotions by showing expressions and other features. Now, in this last part of the page, which makes up about half of the page, it's time for the action to start. And I like to experiment sometimes, and what I'm doing here is a very strange setup. I thought, well, what if I show the spearman on the left in 3 vertical panels, and Sun on the right in 3 vertical panels, and they're each like reaching across the middle panel at each other. They're kind of lined up like some strange game, card game or something. So you got the spearman attacking, sword defending, sword attacking, spearman defending, and just kind of position those around the central image and have the central image be a large panel that shows, that's very dynamic, that shows the 2 figures in combat. Now, the problem with this being more creative, more abstract in its layout, you can see it better now that the lighting changed here. And you can see here I am in real time thinking this through. The problem with this, which I was aware of, is it doesn't track in time. It separates out of time because it becomes this collage, this stylistic collage thing. It's pulling you out of the moment. You have to do extra thinking to connect the spearman's attack to sword's defense and vice versa along these panels on the side. It's creative, it's interesting, but at this moment, I want the reader to be more immersed in the moment-by-moment action. It is time for that to happen. I've already shown, pieces of this leading up to this moment. Now, what I'm working out at this moment is I'm trying to, do very loose figures to try to see exactly how large I want them to be in that panel and how, exactly how they're positioned, how their spears and sword are positioned. I got to get those elements where they need to be for design reasons, and then I can go back and refine them. But what I'm doing here sitting in real time is thinking about that choice that I just described to you. I'm thinking about, well, what else could I do? I thought about having these panels more in a circle shape, kind of like maybe going off to the edge of the paper, just kind of maybe go even further with the collage. But I'm going to end up erasing it and trying something else, which is a bit of an investment. I don't know how long this took. It wasn't like a ton of time, but it was some investment that I had to throw away. If I did tiny thumbnails, it would have been a little bit smaller of an investment, but it also would have removed me further from, really considering the alternative. I kind of have to start down a path to know if I like it or not. Sometimes that's hard to do in thumbnails. So, yeah, that's why I did away with doing tiny thumbnails. One of the reasons I've done away with that is to explore more. And yeah, it looks very slow in real time because I'm thinking that much about it. I'm picturing the fight. I'm thinking about what needs to happen. The spearmen, how quickly do I want to end this piece of the story? This is going to lead to something else, some other action that's going to create reactions and move things along. And I can take a long time or little, so it'll change the length of my comic. So the soldier, I knew I wanted him to attack and Sword to be able to keep up a little bit. And at some point, I want Sword to not be able to keep up anymore. So the idea that I'm struggling with is I'm kind of visualizing how long do I want this to go? Does it feel right to let Sword keep up for this first exchange and then do a second exchange that will go into a second or third page of this before things change? Would that be more appropriate, or could I speed it up and get this first exchange to make it clear that Sword's falling behind? I decided to go with a slower story pace. Let's go ahead and show Sword kind of keeping up with this first exchange and then falling behind in the next one. And then I'm thinking about how to lay that out. And that's always a challenge. I like to put a lot of panels on a page, but also a lot of establishing shots, which, makes it even harder to do a lot of panels. It's just becoming clear to me that I have a preference for putting in extra panels per page to communicate more. And that's just how I, communicate. Maybe even how I communicate in writing. I like my semicolons and stuff instead of ending it with periods. So it was trying to decide, do I go with 2 more rows or 2 large panels side by side? For me, it's pretty large. It's almost a quarter of a page for each panel. Do I want to do just 2 large panels showing some fighting, maybe a shot reverse shot from kind of a long shot? Or do I want to do something else? And I'm thinking about, like I've said before, sort of dynamics in the sense of not exactly the flow from panel to panel. That sometimes we mean something else when we talk about that. But the sort of gesture of the composition of each panel. Because your eye is coming down from the panel above to the right, your eye is going to move over here. I'm going to start with an empty space on the top left. And so, one of 2 things might happen. The eye may travel, it may see this diagonal from bottom left to top right. Your eye may see this diagonal and follow it down to the dead end corner of the panel, going the opposite reading direction, and sort of double back the direction it came. Or it'll just start on the top left with the empty space, which will force the eye to travel down. You're going to, if there was a lot going on in the top left of this panel, you may not look at the bottom part. So I've left the top open, hoping that you'll move down and see the soldier with the spear. He's down there on the left, and follow the thrust of his spear up to sword, which will follow up into the other panel and his spear's thrust there. The camera angle, the angle of the perspective, which the angle of the sort of tiles, the stone on the ground, is going to accentuate this directionality, this gesture of the panel, to help guide the eye, and it's on a curve too, so it's going to curve down to the soldier. It's going to guide the eye up, and that's all intentional as well. Then I've got two panels here. One will be more of a medium shot, medium close-up of sword blocking spear thrusts, and I'm going to indicate more than one thrust in one panel, and then sword countering with a thrust, a long jab of his sword, and the very nimble soldier jumping back, evading it no problem. And that will end the first exchange. So on the next page, we're going to see a new kind of like pause where we check in with each, figure, character, body that's in play, and what's going on in their nervous systems and their emotions, and we'll get a chance to reassess the situation. So what has changed after the action we saw. In the past, I didn't do enough of what I just said. This cycle, this sort of the waves of connecting with the emotion or the bodies of the figures, the characters, getting a chance to assess the situation, and then like the action, what changes, what happens, and then getting to check back in with the characters, the emotions, and get to reassess where we're at after the action. It makes sense when I say it, right? It's like it's pretty straightforward. Of course, you should provide, the before action and after. But when I used to try to squeeze more story into less pages, I hurry the story along, I actually was skipping that a lot. And also because I think it's not wanting to bore a reader, you sort of want to jump from action to action and skip the assessment steps, skip the checking in with characters, bringing it into the body of the reader through transmission of other bodies that are conveyed. I would kind of skip that step because I thought, well, I don't want to bore people with all these, little, pieces that aren't furthering the story. It's not action. So let's just jump. Let's just keep going. But that's less dynamic. It's not as good of storytelling. And I'm getting better at that. And I think that will be the better storytelling is going to be the key. One of two things, three things, I guess. Either your art is going to be so awesome that people love it and they want to check out what you do. Or the story is, what the story is about, the narrative and stuff. If it's like really interesting concept, really likable characters, if you write well with good dialogue and so on, that can be something that'll attract people to it. And then the other one maybe being storytelling, which like visual storytelling. Does it flow? Do you give those moments for people to connect? And that overlaps with the idea of good story, they really overlap. But you've got to do one of those things. And I want to be on the side of good storytelling with a bit of good story, less focused on the quality of the art, because the quality of the art I can't control. I mean, I'm going to draw the way I draw. I'm who I am. I'm going to get better as I go and change as I go. And I want that to be allowed. I want it to be okay to just let it change as I go. And I don't want to force myself, box myself in to try to match other, other styles or match certain qualities that it isn't coming kind of naturally to how I want to work, to what I'm interested in. And so I'm trying to let how much work I put in the drawing and what it looks like be informed by who I am uniquely, informed by what I find interesting and worth drawing. If it applies to like drawing a cityscape. If you hate drawing cityscapes, then maybe it's the way you're drawing that's the problem. Like maybe it's not the horses or the cars or the cities that are the problem. Yes, some things are, harder to draw. We have less experience with them or something. So I get that you might not want to, you might struggle with it. But at the same time, if you're a visual storyteller and there's cities, if it's in a city in that kind of genre or, time period, you're going to need to draw cities and find a way to draw them where you enjoy drawing them. Don't worry about how they're supposed to look, how other people do it. Go outside and draw a city. Find some pictures of cities and draw even from that. Draw from that. But don't try to match it exactly. Draw it in the way you find interesting and enjoy. I think it's better to go that route when you're drawing what you enjoy. And let your style be developed in that direction. And you bet that I, drawing these barely clothed figures, muscular figures, I definitely could stop what I'm doing in the middle of drawing it and reference, do some studies, find some reference, make sure that all my muscles and everything are placed correctly and perfectly. Like I could do that, but I try not to. I try to just have fun with it, and I am getting better slowly. But I'm trying not to stop myself mid-flow and be fixing things like that. If I'm gonna have to do it, it would be better to do it at the very end, after it's completely drawn. Go back, look, and if you're like, that still looks wrong to me, look, find some reference, erase, fix that one spot. Stay in flow while you're drawing. But usually, I don't need to do that because I'm comfortable enough with how it looks. The more I draw, the more this all feels like cartooning. So, these rough sketches I do, like when it's really rough like this, you can see that it's kind of like, it's almost so rough you could call it stick figures. It's not quite, but it's not far from it. And then I add more detail, and even then, it's just like a glorified stick figure. If you think about it. And the more I draw pages, the more it feels like drawing stick figures. The more I draw and the better I get at it, I guess you could say too. But it's also the more I have fun with it and draw in a way that feels natural and enjoyable, then it just looks like my handwriting. And it's fun and easy to do. And yes, it's not perfect. There's going to be anatomical issues and so on. But it's fun and easy to do. And it's getting better over time. So, yeah, obviously practice is good, but practicing in a particular way is what I'm doing, what I'm advocating for. But also, when I thumbnail and it also helps that I'm thumbnailing, that I'm roughing it out on the same paper that I'm going to draw the page on. There's no redoing it. So when I start with those, gestures, those rough lines that are just kind of stick figures, and then draw on top of them, it encourages me to draw in new camera angles and challenging positions with, challenging anatomy and structure. Reality, you could say, in a way, like the whatever camera angle and gesture is conveyed through my stick figures, I have to capture in my finished drawing. That forces you to grow as you go. If you start with more of a clear idea of the forms of even if you start with a sort of puppet instead of like the rough gesture drawing I do, even if you do that, like by drawing the puppet, which is, let's say, made of cylinders and so on, spheres and stuff, even then, by drawing those details, the particular position of each part, you are establishing things that you shouldn't establish yet, right? That it's going to box you in. And so you might accidentally find yourself constantly drawing people dead on from a long shot, like sort of very little perspective on them, because that's what your shapes were. They started like that. So you might end up doing like less interesting stuff and growing less, because you don't have to draw the finishing touches on top of as dynamic of shapes. So get that gesture first, and then you can put your puppet on it. But don't do that yet, even in my book, until I kind of do that gesture stuff, that rough, simple lines with everything, with the backgrounds and everything. Get everything in place. And then I can start to add my puppet, my, sort of models, and add the details and stuff. Yeah, you'll see I'm fixing the foot here to the correct foot that was supposed to be injured, as I said last time. I just keep messing it up, because when I originally did it, I meant to do his right foot, and I just can't shake it. That's what I pictured. Like when I visualize the original panel where his foot gets ripped, I picture it as the other foot, not what I actually drew. And so I end up making the wrong choice every time. It's so silly. But there it is. The foot and the sword is another similar detail on the other side of this page. So inking. I try to start in the top left and go to the bottom right of each panel, so that I don't rub ink, because it does take a while to dry. But you'll see I do go back some, because I'm kind of adding a few more details as I go, like kind of building it out. I'm trying to, give the feel of some of these things, that the leg feels like a leg a bit, that the bandage, it doesn't quite create a smooth line along his silhouette. It feels like each of those strips is a strip, even though there's not really any lines to indicate creases in it. It feels like strips, just by the way they kind of overlap on the silhouette, on the outline. And then there's little lines, hatching lines to indicate the bone or shadow along that side of his foot, on the left there. And then I've got the stone ground with the stone pieces, and you'll see how that just kind of is very loose lines cascading back into the background there. It isn't necessary to do it, but this could have been done by drawing every tile on the ground all the way back into the distance at the top of the page. But those details they're not necessary for one, but they kind of don't help. Like that upper area is supposed to be open space. It's negative space. It's nothing, you know. I want your eye to go down to the foot, lower in the panel. So there's better composition, better balance when I leave it open. If I had drawn every piece of the stone, then, well, I'm going to have to start doing more detail in the colors, for example, or in digitally fading out the inks in certain pieces of the drawing. But I'm trying to use line to convey atmosphere and depth, you know, and all that. I'm trying to get these things substantially completed in the line work and do very little with digital and colors, because I like it. I like doing it that way. All right. So I'm going to go back with the brush pen later. And so some of these spaces you see that I left open, like on his beard, they're going to be solid black, but I'm leaving spots that are going to be hatched that will you know, end up being the highlights in his beard and hair, instead of everything being solid black. And sometimes I'm not really leaving any solid black spots, like on the soldier to his left there, only in the brush. Like, it's not really clear where I should put brush work, and it's not exactly necessary, but it does create a little more depth. So I'm going to add some, but we'll see once I do it where I end up placing that. You'll see here that the tiles on the ground behind his hands holding the sword, the shape of them is intentional. It's not necessarily perfect. If they were actually standing there and there was actually a camera there, the tiles would not be at that angle. But that angle looks nice. It sort of radiates around his hands, around the sword. And it's not so far off that people are going to be like, wait a minute, that's not right. So that's something I do a lot of that I don't think other people do as much of, or I don't see it as much. Hard to say though, because I don't see people draw pages. I just see the finished process, but finished result typically. But I set up my background pieces to frame things and guide the eye the way I want, even though my backgrounds are pretty detailed. I know people that do it when their backgrounds are minimal, but or with heavy shadow or something. But this is with a lot of detail, loose and rough, but still a lot. Like I was saying about buildings, when you have to draw like a lot of people, sort of this crowd of soldiers, once again, how is it fun to me to do that? For me, it's fun when it's looser like this, when it's messier and looser and not so careful. That's fun to me to draw, and it looks fun to me, and so I go with that. But drawing a lot of people like this could be, it could be really draining, really taxing. And to me, that's like, okay, well, maybe you should rethink your style. If this is so draining, then draw it a different way. Because, I mean, I've done it. Like, I've had to learn to do that. Like I've said on this, as you've seen on this, and things I've said in all these episodes we've done. Yeah, I've changed my style according to what I end up enjoying more. Yeah, creating some shadow and some depth, but I'll go back with the brush pen and add a little more probably. And Yeah, and once I get it all, I'll kind of pause and look and see if I should add some more. Yeah. The buildings and so on. I mean, again, with how I position them, I could have positioned this where the building on the left, it is very close to the vanishing point that the street goes to. And it could have been further to the left, and then you could have seen all the way up that street. But I didn't like how that was going to feel. One, I would have to draw indicate at least a bunch of buildings going off on a very narrow, space, going off towards the vanishing point. But I didn't like how that was going to frame the picture. I liked how this building created this line that kind of separated Sword and Sun on the right and the soldiers on the left. And it created this kind of bigger block with the soldiers, like grouping. And so I moved it to the right, maybe further over than it would have been based on the last drawings I did of it. But there's certain, people get it. People aren't even paying that much attention. I'm sure that some of the architecture and stuff is going to change a little bit panel to panel. If you want to take a close look, you'll notice that it's changing. But I've got certain details that I continue to redo that help it, flow, help it seem like people can tell what building it is supposed to be. Another thing that happened here is I had to decide a few pages back were the soldiers going to approach them from the right or from the left. I decided on the left, and I had to think ahead. I had to think, okay, if they approach from the right, yes, you can change, directions, but that means that we might end up with Sword and Sun on the left, the soldiers on the right. It felt more appropriate to have the soldiers on the left, Sword and Sun on the right, as I set up the scene, set up the fight. Not sure exactly why. At this point, I don't remember what I was thinking, but I know generally going right to left in Western comics, where it's generally left to right, can feel like going back. So our, Sword and Sun have been traveling to the right mostly, maybe towards the camera, but always slightly to the right as they came down the hill. But then when they came to a stop, they had to turn around and confront what had been pursuing them in a way. So it conveys some sense of meaning there, going backward, turning around to face it and not being able to get away. And also kind of a turning point in the story too. You can see now how the stone on the ground is bringing your eye down towards them, and it's also kind of pointing up towards the next panel that we're going to go to next. And like a week or two ago, I didn't care too much. I didn't have a lot of time, but I wasn't feeling much of a need to work on anatomy a few weeks ago. But now that I'm in this scene and there's a lot of movement of muscular figures, I'm like, oh, I would like to brush up on that. I'm letting myself be guided by what I would like to do, and not just what I think I have to do. And I think that's important, to treat yourself well, because you're going to be doing this for a long time. This is part of your life. And I mean, you're welcome to do it. You're welcome to just do it for fun one time, but that's different when you just give something a try versus when you really learn how to do it with sort of love and pleasure and make it your thing. Yeah. The pencils were not very clear on the background, but I'm kind of just trusting myself to ink it correctly the first time. Sometimes I wonder, how much shadow I should put on a building, such as like parallel hatching lines over a background element. And when I'm drawing, I'm not thinking about rules so much. I'm thinking about like how it would look if I was there. Like I'm trying to think of reality, and I end up, sometimes I end up making good choices that represent rules that other people will teach you about art. But it's always more organic. For me, it's coming from trying to draw something that as it would look there. I think that's a better way to go about it than a super structured way, but it might depend on who you are, how you're wired. Here, I wasn't sure about that background shading until I did the foreground. And then I saw, yeah, this wouldn't hurt. This would not confuse the foreground figure with the background. Another reason I struggle with where to place those shadows on, like, let's say a building. Well, for one, like I'm saying, if it's a background element, especially if the background, if the buildings are vanishing off, if there's building after building vanishing off in the background, at what stages do I start to use less lines, less shading, less contrast, as I should? But, when do I start that? And as you should, because in reality, that's how it looks. When you're looking at something, it's going to have less contrast the further away it gets and less clear to you. But I also struggle with the shadow, like according to the lighting. I'm thinking about, okay, with the sun positioned here, we've got a cast shadow here. We've got a part of the building in shadow, meaning lit by secondary light from clouds and so on. And we've got like an alleyway that's maybe blocking some of the secondary light. So maybe that's extra shadow there. And just trying to, imagine where would the shadows be if I was looking at this, really was there. Again, I want to comment on the negative space, the empty space that I am leaving in each panel. There's a shape to the main elements, the positive elements, and then there's a shape to the empty space too. And I'm always leaving some. I didn't have to. The buildings could have been taller, and creating an entire block of building behind a sword and this soldier in these first few panels. The tiles on the ground could have been drawn all the way off in that first panel there. But I'm trying to leave open spaces. You could say it lets the eye rest. With the heavy black shadow, I try to be decisive, and it is, it's not fully planned out. I'm going by feel, but I'm trying to let the shadows be decisive and not. So I'm going to overdo it a little bit. They're going to be a slightly abstracted from reality, bolder than you think they should be. A stronger shape to them than they would be, because I'd rather err on the side of bold, let's say. As you see with these shadows here underneath them, they're exaggerated, they're longer than they should be. It's as if like more of a sunset than it is, but they help balance the page and so on. They're a bold choice. And you'll see, the foreground, is going to pop even more off the background when I add the heavier blacks with the brush pen. So the way I'm noticing this is if it doesn't work before I add the brush pen, the heavy blacks, it's not going to work. the page already worked without adding this. This is just making it a little pop, a little more punch to it. And here is the finished page. These guys just have paint, kind of a painted spot on their heads. A little solar flare or whatever, like a glare coming off of his sword. The standoff panel. Those don't have to be very big. Your establishing shots don't have to be huge to do their job. Yeah, and there's how I indicated the spear in the second to last panel, the spear jabbing again and again. I've got these little lines that indicate where it had just been, almost like a motion blur. And there's not going to be a lot of words in these pages. The storytelling is going well. It's clear. The affect of the characters and checking in with that. Everything's pretty clear without the words. They could have been saying things that maybe would have added to the story, but that's not what I envisioned. I envisioned two serious fighters. These are both very serious fighters. There's not much talking. And that's it for this week. We are approaching episode 100. Maybe I'll do something special for that one to celebrate or making it that far with almost one per week. I think I've only not done that one time. That is almost 2 years of doing this. And it's been great. Be the practice of your art and encourage others to do the same. And that's what I'll be doing. I'll try to be the practice of my art, which involves the art of living, as there's no escaping that. See you next time.